So the Mishnah says, "Omer ish ploni yirasheni." If a person says, such and such a person will inherit me, b'makom sheyesh bas, meaning to say, he says, let's say my brother, will inherit me, but he has a daughter. The daughter overrides the brother, or biti tirasheni, or my daughter will inherit me. B'makom sheyesh ben, but he has a son. The son has to inherit. Lo makom. It doesn't work. He can't say that. Shehisna masha kosav the Torah, because he made a condition against the Torah, stipulation against the Torah. It doesn't work. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, excuse me, Im Amar al mi sheroy yarsho. If he said it about somebody who was actually in line to inherit, let's say there were three sons, and he says one of them will inherit everything, then it works, because they were supposed to split it. So he took that idea and put it all on one, and then it works. Then Varav Kayamin. But if he says about somebody who was not in that line to inherit, and in Varav Kayamin, then it doesn't work. So now the Gemara says about the Mishnah. And we went to the Mishnah. If a person says this person will inherit when he has a daughter, or my daughter will inherit when there's a son, he didn't say anything because he made a stipulation against the Torah. Taima, what's the reason why he's considered like he's stipulating at the Torah against the Torah? Because he says the achar b'mkom bat ubat b'mkom ben, because he wants to give it to somebody else instead of the daughter, or to the daughter instead of the son. Ben bein abanim ubas bein abanos tvarav kayamin. So this would imply that if he wants to give it to one son amongst the other sons, or one daughter amongst the other daughters, it would work. Ema seifa, but the concluding clause says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Amar Misharal Yarsha Dvarav Kayamin. So, but then isn't that exactly what Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is saying? That if you say it to somebody who's in line to inherit, it works. So that's the exact same case as the first. I know Tanakama. I mean, say Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is consistent with the Tanakama. So why is his position being recorded as arguing with the Tanakama? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, if you want to say the distinction is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka saying, afilu la'achar b'makom bas, meaning to say Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is saying that he's allowed to, even if he gives it to somebody else in the place of the daughter, ubas b'makom ben ka'amar, meaning to say, even if he gives it to somebody else instead of the daughter, or daughter instead of the son, it's going to work. Meaning to say, and that we're saying that which Rabbi Yochanan says that he can only give it to somebody who's in line to inherit. That means to say, you want to interpret it to mean somebody who's in line to inherit it after the other person, like a daughter amongst the sons or a brother amongst the sons. That would work. But if he's saying somebody who's not in line to inherit at all, that won't work. If that's what you want to say, Rabbi Yochanan Broka means, Vatanya, it can't be. Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosha, Rabbi Yochanan Broka Omer, Nechaku Abel Chachamim Al Achar b'Makom Bas Ubas b'Makom Ben Shalom Akum. My father would admit with the sages that if he says to somebody else instead of the daughter, or the daughter instead of the son, he said nothing. Where do they argue? Only about a son amongst the sons. My father says you could give it to one son amongst the other sons, or one daughter amongst the other daughters. And the Chachamim say no. Well, if that's the case, isn't that the implication of the first clause? Because the first clause says if you said it to this person will inherit in the case of a daughter, which would imply, the implication is somebody else amongst the daughter. But if it was one daughter amongst the other daughters, it would work. So it seems. So how do we explain that the Tanakama seems to be in agreement with Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka? So the Gemara says, "Ibayis Ema." So Gemara is going to give two ways to answer this question. First approach is Midika Amar. That which Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, says, "Well, Nechaku Mikal." He means to say, we learn from here, the Tanakama Savar Nechaku. Meaning to say, you could say the first approach is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is a position they don't argue. But the Tanakama of our Mishnah is saying, actually, I think that they are arguing. Meaning to say that according to the Tanakama of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka would even give it to somebody else who was not in line to inherit. That's what the Tanakhama's position of our Mishnah is, that they actually do argue in that case. That's the first approach. The second approach is Ibayasema Kula Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Or alternatively, we could say the whole Mishnah is in fact Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and there's no argument between Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and the Tanna Kama. And what are they arguing about? Because the Chisurim Mechsar, the text is missing. This is what it means. If a man says, I want somebody to inherit me and he has a daughter, or or my daughter will inherit me when there's a son. He said nothing. But if he wants to give it to one girl amongst all of his other daughters, or one son amongst all the other sons, that works. So according to this approach, the Rabbi Yochanan Broka is just explaining or supporting the whole idea of the Tanna Kama. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Halachik Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. The law is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that he can give it to one son amongst the other sons and one daughter amongst the other daughters. V'chein Amarav Halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Amarav, my time at Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. What's the reasoning for Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka? What's the reasoning for it? So he says it's based upon a verse. The verse says in Deuteronomy 21:16, on the day that he gives it to his sons to inherit. But it doesn't say sheyanchilu banav. We learn from here, Torah no reshus la'av lahanchil kol mi sheyirtzeh. So the Torah gives the father the permission to give it to whichever one he wants. So Amalei Abaye, what about the fact that it says this idea of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is not learned out from that verse, it's learned out from a different verse. Lo yuchal levaker, that he's not allowed to give the inheritance away from the firstborn. So the Torah says he's not allowed to pass it away from the firstborn, his portion, and give it to other sons. That implies that from all his other kids, he's allowed to take away their portion. So why are you learning it out from Yom HaChilos Banav? So Gemara says, "Ahumi Baile." He's the pasuk of Lo Yuchal Levaker to teach us. Look at the Tanya. Abachanan Omer Mishum Rabbi Elazar. Ma Tam Omer Lo Yuchal Levaker. What does it teach us? Because it says on the day that you bequeath to your sons. Yachol, you might have thought Balodinu, that you might have said about the firstborn from a Kal V'chomer. Ma Pashat Sheyafa Kocho Shenotel Beroi. Just like a non-firstborn, he takes even those assets that are earmarked for him. He takes the kibbutz muchzak as though he already has it. And Torah and the Torah gives him permission to give to whoever he wants. A firstborn who has less power, because he doesn't get in the double portion, he only gets what he has already, not the earmarked. So therefore, came for sure you should be able to take away the assets from the firstborn and give it to the other portions. So therefore, Torah has to say, "Lo yuchol levaker." So the Gemara says, "V'yomer lo yuchol levaker." Maybe it just should say that verse. Why does it say the other verse? Sheyachol, you might have thought v'alodinu, because it's a kal v'chomer. Ma b'chor she'ura kocho she'enu noto b'roi k'v'mok. So just like a firstborn who has less, so who has less strength because he doesn't get the earmarked as his portion. And Torah says you can't replace him. Non-firstborn has more strength, who does get the earmarked. Wouldn't it be the case that you can't change his portion? The Torah gives permission to give to whoever he wants. Now the Gemara says, the law is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that you could give it to somebody, you give all your assets to somebody who is in line to inherit. Rabbi Zeka didn't say that the law is like him. He said, meaning to say, he ruled that way. But my kamif, okay? What's their argument? Whether he said the halacha or whether he ruled that way. Marasavar halacha adifa. One says when a sage says that this is the law, that's actually preferable to actually him having a case where he actually ruled that way. Marasavar ma'isarav. This is actually a very interesting case for jurisprudence, for theory. What's stronger, a statute or case law or precedent? So which is stronger here? That the rabbi said halacha, or that there was an actual incident, it's called a Ma'aser Rav, that a great sage ruled like this or actually acted that way. Because if you want to just say it's the halacha, it means that's the theoretical how he rules. But if you say Ma'aser Rav, he actually did it that way. So it's a whole question which is better, because they're trying to.
It's in this context. If the halacha is not written down, they're defined literally, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a statute, it's written down. Right?
I mean, there are two sides to it. There's because how do you interpret the statute? So,
but to make it analogous to like a statute, you say what's stronger, a precedent or the words of the Torah? The words of the Torah would win, right?
Well, let's see what they say. So, Tana Rabbanan, Eila Meidin Halacha, you don't learn how to law, you can't learn out law from, let's say, something that the Rebbe said, in his shir. Maybe he was just speaking. He wasn't so careful. Or seeing what your Rebbe did, because maybe there was extenuating circumstances. Until the Rebbe actually says this psak, the Rebbe teaches you how to act. That's the only way to know. The Brisa continues, and he says, let's say they said to him, is this halacha ma'isa? Then he has to act that way. He can act that way his whole life, and he doesn't need to ask him each time what the ruling is, as long as it's similar. But as long as he doesn't try to compare it and draw another inference from it, meaning you're limited. It has to be exactly like the Rebbe. What does that mean? Are we comparing everything in the Torah? That's basically the essence. So that's a beautiful statement. Let's pull that phrase out. The whole Torah is comparisons. Yeah, there's limitation. You can't do comparisons by treifus, or by what makes an animal non-kosher, like the lungs, like comparing the lung to the liver, because they're not similar. Something that makes it non-kosher by a lung isn't what makes it non-kosher by a liver. The Tanya, you can't say, by a treifus, this is what's similar. You mean say when it comes to biology, what disqualifies an animal in one case is not what works in another case. And don't compare, and don't be shocked by this, because we know that sometimes when you cut an animal in this part of the body, it dies, and you cut it there, it doesn't die. So the organs are not the same. So Rabbi Az said to Rabbi Yochanan, when our teacher says to us that this is the law, should we act in accordance with it? Should we do an action? Amar lo. So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Lo tavidu adamina halacha ma'isa. Don't say anything until I say it's halacha ma'isa. That actually act like this. This is saying that Rabbi Soloveitchik, he didn't want anybody taking notes in his Gemara shiurim, because he said, we're just talking it out. This is just the theory. It's not the ruling. And he was afraid that people are going to take his teachings and apply them. We still have his notes because some of the students were very careful and they wrote it back. Like they managed to take notes, Baruch Hashem. But he didn't want people taking the notes before the ideas were formulated. Right. And it's like, and like right now, we're just going through the Gemara, and I'm sure we have many mistakes, and it's not the final ruling of it. When a ruling comes into our hands, and you have a question about it, meaning say when you get one of my psaks and you have a question, don't tear it up until you bring it back to me and ask me. If I have an answer, I'll say to you, otherwise I'll recant. But after I die, don't tear it up, and also don't teach it, don't learn from it to make a ruling. Don't tear it up, because if I would be there, maybe I explain it. But also don't learn from it The Eila Daina Maisha in Avros, because it's possible I only gave the ruling based upon what I saw. Meaning to say, and you can't assume that if I was alive, I'd have an answer. Meaning to say, you're limited. So if you don't understand it, don't learn for it. So this is and this is basically it's based on logic. Also, you're limited. If you don't understand it, then don't rule it. I mean, don't be blind acceptance of the halacha. Basically, after I die, well, I'm alive. Go and ask me. After I die, you don't have to follow it. Just don't tear it up. Don't tear it up. Oh, it's a beautiful Gemara. Actually, we should study in more depth. Shekoyach and good shot.